This is Deadly Truths, where history, horror, and humanity collide. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time. Took a little family vacation for the holidays, and of course, we all got sick. So my voice does not sound the greatest, although I have done more than one recording in the past where I've had a head cold or something similar. I do have young twins and they bring home absolutely everything. So sadly, I'm constantly fighting some sort of head cold, it seems like. Not to mention, as you all know, I live in Nevada. I'm extremely allergic to what Nevada grows like no other, which is sagebrush. Between the colds that I get from my kids, and then, of course, the sagebrush, my voice sometimes can sound a little bit more gravelly than others. And I do appreciate everybody who's been hanging in there through all the edits and changes as far as sound and things along these lines. I'm clearly doing this all on my own, and I am trying to figure out what works best and figuring out what doesn't in the process. Thank you very much for supporting me any way you can, whether that's following or just listening, because it's just little old me doing this, which I'm sure you can tell by listening to all the past episodes. Today's story is not about scandal. It is not about rumors, affairs, or Hollywood gossip. It's about money, contracts, and a system that learned very early how much a woman's body was worth and how disposable it was once it started to fail. Jean Harlow was one of the first true movie stars in American history. Her image helped build modern Hollywood. Her labor made studios millions. And when her body began to break down, the industry didn't slow her schedule. They did not stop production, and they didn't intervene medically in time. She was only 26 years old when she died. This episode is going to examine how Jean Harlow was not simply a tragic figure. She is and was a warning, a case study in exploitation, medical neglect, and an industry that confused productivity with immortality. This is Jean Harlow, Hollywood's first star, worked to death. This episode does discuss real events involving illness, medical neglect, and death. While no violence is depicted, the subject matter may be distressing for some listeners. The analysis presented is based on historical records, studio documents, medical accounts, and contemporary reporting. Some conclusions reflect informed interpretation where definitive evidence no longer exists. This program does not assign legal guilt. By early June of 1937, Harlow was already sick, not the kind of sick that stops production, the kind that studios learn to work around. She was filming Saratoga for MGM, one of the most expensive productions of the year. She had been exhausted for weeks, complaining of abdominal pain, severe fatigue, nausea, and swelling. The warning signs were there. They just weren't convenient. On June 4th, Jean collapsed on set. Filming paused briefly. Scripts were adjusted. Close-ups were delayed. Stand-ins were used. She was sent home, not hospitalized, not removed from contract obligations, just told to rest. By June 6th, her condition worsened rapidly. Her abdomen was visibly distended. She was in severe pain. She struggled to move. Her skin took on a grayish tone. Her breath became labored. Friends were alarmed. The studio was cautious, not medically, but financially. A doctor was finally called. What that doctor saw was catastrophic. Jean Harlow wasn't suffering from exhaustion. She wasn't run down. She was in acute kidney failure. Her body was retaining toxins it could no longer filter. Her organs were shutting down. By then, it was too late. On the morning of June 7th, 1937, Jean Harlow died at the age of 26. No dramatic collapse under the studio lights, no final scene. She died quietly after weeks of warning signs that had been minimized, reframed, and ignored because stopping production cost money. Hollywood didn't miss the symptoms, it tolerated them. And that distinction matters because Jean Harlow didn't die suddenly, she died predictably. And once you understand how she was made into a star, you'll understand why no one stopped the machine in time. Jean Harlow wasn't born platinum blonde. That part does matter. The look that made her famous, her hair, the skin, the glare, that was not natural. It was engineered. To keep her hair that color, her scalp was treated repeatedly with peroxide, bleach, ammonia, and harsh dyes. No conditioning formulas, no scalp protection, just chemical burns disguised as glamour. Her hair thinned, her scalp cracked and blistered. Studios didn't call it damage, they called it maintenance. This was the early studio system where actors were assets, not patients. If the assets still photographed well, production continued, and Jean photographed beautifully, right up until her body started breaking down. Then there was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes didn't just date Jean Harlow, he fixated on her. He monitored her weight, he controlled her diet, he pushed extreme fasting under the guise of health. This was decades before we had words like eating disorders, but the behavior was already there. Thin meant profitable, exhaustion meant compliant. Hughes loved control. Hollywood rewarded that. And Jean was caught in the middle of a system that demanded she be blonde beyond biology, thin beyond safety, and available beyond endurance, all while working grueling schedules with little rest, poor nutrition, and untreated infections. This wasn't some mysterious curse of old Hollywood. This was burnout culture, just without HR departments and lawsuits. If Jean Harlow had collapsed in 2026, Happy New Year, by the way, we would call it workplace exploitation, medical neglect, and failure of duty of care. But in 1937, they called it a sudden illness. That was the good old days. The damage wasn't hidden, it was visible in her hair, her skin, her exhaustion. It just didn't matter yet because the machine was still running. And as long as Jean Harlow could stand in front of a camera, Hollywood was going to keep rolling. By 1937, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, wasn't just a studio, it was a factory. Actors weren't stars, they were inventory. Contracts weren't agreements, they were control systems. Jean Harlow was under a long-term studio contract that dictated her appearance, her schedule, her public behavior, and her medical decisions. Yes, her medical decisions. If MGM approved the doctor stayed. If the doctor interfered with production, then that doctor disappeared. Stopping a film wasn't just inconvenient, it was financially unthinkable. Saratoga was already over budget, sets were built, supporting actors were scheduled, distribution timelines were locked. So when Jean became visibly ill, MGM didn't ask, is she safe? They asked, can we shoot around her? And they did. There were the stand-ins, the script rewrites, the close-ups that were delayed. Hollywood did not stop, it just rearranged. They treated a dying woman like a broken printer. Troubleshoot, patch, restart, keep the office running. The studio line was exhaustion. The studio lie was she'll bounce back. But kidney failure doesn't bounce. Jean's condition became impossible to hide, the swelling, the pain, the collapse. And only then did MGM allow hospitalization. By then, the math was already done. Replacing Jean Harlow was expensive. Stopping Saratoga was worse. And that's the core truth Hollywood never advertised as Jean Harlow wasn't worked to death because no one knew better. She was worked to death because the contract made her cheaper than delay. No villain twirling a mustache, no dramatic conspiracy, just paperwork, schedules, and money. And a system that never learned the difference between productivity and cruelty. Jean Harlow didn't die because medicine in 1937 was primitive. She died because it wasn't used. By the time doctors were finally allowed to intervene, her symptoms were textbook, even by 1930 standards. She had severe fatigue, abdominal swelling, persistent nausea, pain, and fluid retention. These were not subtle signs, they were alarms. Kidney failure wasn't unknown in 1937. They understood infection as well. They understood that swollen abdomens and systematic decline meant something was deeply wrong. What they didn't do was act early, because early action would have required stopping that production. Instead, Jean was treated for what studios always preferred to diagnose, which was nerves, exhaustion. And then, of course, females, they were just so fragile. In other words, inconvenience. She was given bed rest, diet adjustments, and minimal monitoring. No aggressive testing, no hospitalization until collapse was unavoidable. And here is the hard truth. Once acute kidney failure reaches that stage, survival becomes unlikely, especially without modern dialysis. But this wasn't sudden. This wasn't overnight. This was weeks of visible decline that was reframed as temperament and fatigue, because acknowledging reality would have cost a lot of money. And when hospitalization finally did come, it was not decisive medicine, it was crisis management. It was too late. They were too cautious. The doctors didn't just miss that diagnosis, they deferred it. And deferral in this case, it was lethal. Jean Harlow did not die from bad luck. She died from a system where doctors answered to studios, studios answered to contracts, and no one answered to the patient. By the time the medical narrative caught up to the physical reality, her body had already crossed the point of no return. This wasn't a mystery illness. It was delayed response, and delay, not arrogance, is what killed her. Hollywood didn't panic when Jean Harlow died. It organized. Within hours, the narrative hardened. Jean Harlow had suffered a sudden illness, a tragic, unforeseeable medical event. No blame, no buildup, no system. That framing was not accidental. The studio emphasized how fast everything happened because speed erases responsibility. If it's sudden, no one had time to intervene. The diagnosis quietly disappeared from those headlines. What the public heard instead was a brief illness, an unexpected complication, and she was resting comfortably. Comfortable people don't die of organ failure. But Hollywood needed her death to look like weather, not consequences. Then came the funeral. It was carefully staged, closed casket, controlled access, minimal medical detail. Not because of respect, but because visible decline doesn't match that fantasy. And here's the second wow moment. MGM immediately moved to finish Saratoga. No halt, no shelve it, just finish it. Stand-ins were used, dialogue, of course, was rewritten, and close-ups, well, that just didn't happen. Jean Harlow was dead, but still contractually useful. And it became one of MGM's highest grossing successes of the decade. Her death sold tickets. And finally, the quietest tell of all, there was no serious industry reckoning, no internal reform, no public discussion of medical oversight or production schedules. Hollywood didn't ask what went wrong, it asked how to move on. If Jean Harlow had died today, as I had discussed a little prior, there would be lawsuits, investigation, OSHA inquiries, and leaked emails. In 1937, there was a press release, and that's how the system protected itself. Minimize the timeline, apply the cause, monetize the aftermath. Jean Harlow became a legend. Because legends don't testify, Hollywood learned something crucial that year. You can work someone to death as long as you control the story afterward. Jean Harlow was a headline, a contract, or was she a cautionary tale? She was Harleen Harlow Carpenter. She was born in good old Kansas City, Missouri. Midwestern, practical, not groomed for celebrity. Her early life wasn't tragic, wasn't theatrical, it was ordinary. She didn't arrive in Hollywood chasing fame. She followed her mother west. She took extra work, background roles, modeling jobs, the kind of work you take when you're young, you're broke, and you're flexible, not when you're trying to become a legend. Jean didn't invent the platinum image, the system did. Hollywood saw a face that photographed cleanly, a voice that cut through dialogue, and she had a presence that pulled focus without trying to. She was promoted quickly not because she demanded it, but because she didn't. And that, again, does matter. Then, as I had said, Howard Hughes entered the picture. Hughes didn't discover Jean in a casting office. He noticed her because everyone else noticed her. He inserted himself into her life with money, control, and access, the Hollywood holy trinity. Private planes, surveillance-level attention, diet control, framed as care. He didn't build her career, he monitored it. Jean was young, ambitious, and deeply unprotected. Legally, medically, and emotionally. She was not naive, but she was outmatched. And here's the part a lot of people forget. By all accounts, Jean was, in fact, actually funny, truly funny. Dry and warm, generous with friends. She wasn't the brittle sex symbol Hollywood sold. She was a working actress trying to keep up with expectations that she had never designed. She didn't set out to become a warning. She just said yes in a system that punished no one for asking too much. So when we talk about Jean Harlow, we're not talking about a myth. We're talking about a woman from the Midwest who became famous faster than anyone learned how to protect her. She didn't burn out because she was reckless. She burned out because the machine had no off switch. And remembering her, who she was before the contracts and that cover story, is the one thing Hollywood never learned how to do well. Jean Harlow did not die because Hollywood was cruel in some unique and outdated way. She died because productivity was valued more than people, and that has not changed. The language has. Today we call it grind culture, hustle, being booked and busy. In 1937, they called it being professional. Jean showed up sick because the system rewarded endurance and punished pause. She ignored her symptoms because stopping felt like failure. She trusted that someone in power would intervene. No one did. That's the part that should feel, sadly, familiar. Modern burnout does not look like collapse under studio lights. It looks like working through illness, normalizing exhaustion, apologizing for rest, calling warning signs stress. Jean Harlow was told to rest, but not to stop. That distraction killed her. And here's the final truth Hollywood never advertised. The system didn't break when Jean died. It just adapted and learned. It learned how to rebrand exploitation as ambition, how to sell overwork as dedication, how to memorialize people instead of protecting them. Jean Harlow didn't need to be immortalized. She needed a day off, a doctor who could say no to a contract, a system with an off switch. We don't honor her by repeating this myth. We honor her by recognizing the pattern and refusing to call it burnout success. Because the most dangerous lie isn't that Jean Harlow died young, it's that we think we've moved past what killed her. You've been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. Jean Harlow was not a mystery, she was a warning, one Hollywood chose not to read. Her death was not sudden, it was scheduled, minimized, and monetized, and she was not the last. In our next episode, we turn to Thelma Todd, another woman the industry framed as a tragic abnormality. It was an anomaly, folks, when the pattern was already clear. Now, it's different circumstances, but it's the same machine. If you want these stories to keep being told, don't just listen, follow the show. Rate it. But, moreover, just follow. Share the episode with someone who still thinks burnout is success. That's how these histories stay visible and how the record gets corrected. I'm Becca again, and clearly the narration and the research, it's always done by me. I know you guys can tell by now. So this was Deadly Truths, where the past isn't dead. It's just being edited in Hollywood.